Right, recording and transcription has started. This meeting will be recorded and made available to view via the Council's website, except for discussions involving confidential or exempt items. Therefore, the images, audio of those individuals speaking will be publicly available to all via the recording on the Council website at www.caerphilly.uk. Right, before we go to agenda item 1, the person on my right is going to be very embarrassed now. It's Kath Forbes-Thompson, last Scrutiny Committee. And I would, on behalf of all political members in this authority, like to thank her for her service before she retires. She's going to be greatly missed by all of us for her advice and guidance, and the fact that she tells me off in pre-meetings. Thank you, Kath. I think officers on the bench on the side will also echo those sentiments. I know you didn't this was going to happen, and so we're extremely embarrassed, but I'm sorry, but I thought I needed to do it. Thank you, Kath. And can we have a round of applause, please? Right.
Thank you, Chair.
Quite all right. On to the non-pleasant stuff of the evening, which is in the Ministry report. Sorry, Robert. To receive apologies for absence. I've had Councillor Teresa Heron. Have we had any others?
We've received no other apologies, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Teresa Heron is caught up in work. So we move to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Councillors and officers are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and or prejudicial interest in respect of any item of business on this agenda in accordance with the Local Government Act 2000, the Council's Constitution and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. Are there any such declarations? Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Chair. Just on item number 9, a personal interest due to being a council tenant. Thanks.
I'll seek advice from Monitoring Officer.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McConnell. That's in order for you to declare a personal interest there. It's not about your specific tenancy, so that's absolutely fine. Also, Chair, while I've got the microphone in front of me, Councillor Chris Morgan, the relevant cabinet member here this evening, also has a technical prejudicial interest under paragraph 13 of the code, and that paragraph means that because Councillor Morgan was part of the cabinet that made the decision that is being called in this evening, he has a prejudicial interest. But under paragraph 14.2 of the code, sorry, this is a bit of a lesson, because you've called him before your committee this evening to answer questions, then he may take part in the meeting. So whilst he's got a prejudicial interest, he can take a part in the meeting. He is, of course, not a member of the Scrutiny Committee, being a cabinet member. I hope that's clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shanter. Thanks very much indeed. So we move to agenda item 3, which is the Housing and Environment Scrutiny Committee held on the 11th February 2025. And that is found on pages 1 to 8. And I'll run through them. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6 and page 7 and page 8. Would anybody like to move that as a true record, please? Thank you, Councillor Davis. Have we got a seconder?
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Hussey. Can I have the voting slip up, please? Thank you very much indeed. Right, I'll move to agenda item 4, which is consideration of any matter referred to this committee in accordance with the call-in procedure. And we have one, which is the Pontefraith Leisure Centre, special cabinet on the 12th of March 2025. And just to remind elected members, the Scrutiny Committee, and Mr. Tranter may advise me if I got this procedure wrong, can decide if we want to ask Cabinet to reconsider its decision on the closure or refer it to full council. Note if it's referred to council, they cannot make the decision. They carry out a scrutiny function, and if they wish for it to be reconsidered, it would need to go back to cabinet. Right. Before I ask the people who've signed the call-in procedure, can I make it quite clear, as I did at the pre-meeting, that this is not a discussion about fee pitch fees, because that is a separate item. And if you have a problem with the increase in fee pitch fees, that I would recommend that's brought to full council via a motion of your own. So I'm not going to allow any discussion on fee pitch fees. Okay? Is that clear with everybody? Yeah. I'm sorry I'm shouting, but I'll get my new hearing aids next week, so I'll be able to calm down. Right, Councillor Owen, Councillor Judith Pritchard and Councillor Hayden Pritchard, who called in respect, can they set out their reasons for the call-in, please? Councillor Judith Pritchard.
Yes, I did volunteer to give the reasons. I'm not entirely sure that it's in order for us to be examined. I would have expected the officer to give a bit more financial information on the situation. And the other thing I really would like to know is when this is the same call-in as we had that was withdrawn some time ago. And it was the subject of judicial review, and the council actually decided maybe it wasn't on very firm grounds in allowing the withdrawal of this call-in. And I would like to know whether the people who put it forward and then withdrew, did they have to give grounds for the withdrawal? So maybe the monitoring officer could explain that first.
I think we need to go to the cabinet member first. Is that correct, Mr. Tranda?
Yeah, I'll just deal with that. Councillor Pritchard, you are one of the 4 members that have called in this evening the decision, and your call-in states that the decision was made without a proper examination of the true costs involved by either a scrutiny committee or cabinet to inform the decision made. So I must admit, I would have thought that you or one of the other 3 members would have amplified on what you mean by true costs this evening and explained why you think that the decision should be called in. As regards the previous call-in that was made, that call-in was withdrawn. No reasons were given for the withdrawal other than 2 of the members chose not to no longer call in the decision. So the call-in was no longer effective, in my view, for a number of reasons. The legal advice that we had was that perhaps wasn't as sound as it could be, albeit it's never been tested by the High Court. So I've got sort of views on that. So those were the reasons that it was withdrawn, and that is totally irrelevant for the call-in that you have made, along with these 3 other members, to this evening's scrutiny committee. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that reply. Yes, I'm perfectly willing to give some reasons of why we still think that the financial...
Councillor Pritchard, can you go through the chair, please?
Oh, sorry. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Is it my turn to speak now?
Yes, but you have to go through myself as chair of the committee.
Oh, I've got to
not engage in direct conversation with the officers unless I do call them.
Oh, okay then. I'm sorry about that. Yes, chair. Right. I am now going to outline some of the reasons why I think the other members of the call-in group feel that we should have had more financial information to illuminate the decision, or rather the cabinet should have had more financial information to illuminate the decision that they made to close Pont-Llanspraith Leisure Centre. One of them was we had financial information about the condition survey. Now, this condition survey of Pont-Llanspraith Leisure Centre was carried out in 2019. That's before the COVID pandemic. And a lot has changed since then. Actually, I would expect the survey to reveal higher prices, but I think the Cabinet should have known that. I think details of the various items that needed repair, etc., should have been explained in an up-to-date form. That's one reason. My suspicions about the council's evaluation of condition surveys are actually based on experience. I mean, I've had, certainly in Llancaiach, I think, on the security issue, where the council said that it would cost 30,000 and it ended up counted a lot more, costing a lot more, or estimated to cost a lot more. And then many years ago, when the council tried to, well, they did, close the canteen in Caerphilly Leisure Centre, which I used to frequent, and they came out with a long list of what was needed doing in the kitchen, which frankly
Councillor
felt was-
Pritchard, can I bring you back on
I'm just
track?
giving the, well, I'm
Yeah,
just giving
I know you're giving
precedence.
background,
Yeah,
Councillor
I'm giving
Pritchard,
background.
and I will
Okay.
prepare you to continue, but you've
Yeah.
used the word suspicions, and you're now referring to other locations within
Oh,
the
okay.
authority that are not Pontefraith Leisure Centre.
Yes,
we
no, I
stick to the
appreciate
point,
that,
please?
but I mean, I'm giving you the background, and I'm giving
No, you're not.
giving you the reason why I feel as I do. The another reason is that this is going to be there's going to be a new joint use of the facilities that are, sports facilities that are going to be provided there, in conjunction with the Vulnerable Learning Centre. And we've had no estimate of what proportion of those facilities will be paid for, and what proportion will be due to the school, because previously part of the cost of the Pontefraith Leisure Centre was defrayed by the school use. So we haven't had that. And there's also a mention of marketing the land, some of the land that would be released for sale. And there again, we've had no estimate of how much that would be likely to bring in, or whether it would be likely to be attractive to developers. So those are basically the reasons why we felt that it should be called in. Also, there's no mention of the cost to the users of the extra problems with getting to other leisure centres rather than Pontefraith. I'm not talking about football pitch fees now. I'm talking about transport. And if you read, I'm sure everybody has read, the consultation was very much in favour of keeping Pontefraith Leisure Centre going. And it was pointed out.
You've got 30 seconds, Councillor Pritchard.
And thank you. And it was pointed out at the time that it was very unsatisfactory from the point of view of families in need or not very well off, and disabled people. So we should have had some estimate of what it would cost the users or the former users if it were not to exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pritchard. I note that Councillor Bishop's got a hand up, but I've got two questions that were raised at pre-meeting, Councillor Bishop, so I'll take you third. Councillor Chris Morgan, Cabinet Member, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to answer Councillor Pritchard and what she mentioned about the condition survey, and there was various appendices attached to the report that came to Cabinet, both fully explaining the costs of work needed doing and explaining the cost of from 476,000, which has risen to 736,000. So Cabinet had all that information before we actually made the decision. I don't know if any officers want to take on anything else of what Councillor Pritchard had to say.
Rob Hartshorn.
Yes, thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Chair. I'll just cover a few points that Councillor Pritchard has made. So, in terms of the costs that were included within the report, there's the equivalent of 2 pages of text, relating to financial implications. So a full 2 sides of A4, throughout the report, not just in the financial implications section, but elsewhere in the report, detailing some of the financial issues and financial elements and considerations. In terms of the conditions survey, so that was undertaken in December 2019. So we do have further details. So there's some information is provided in the report, a summary of priority 1, 2, and 3 repairs that have been identified, and some explanation as to what that is. But through the and we do hold further detail, but through the scrutiny process and in the cabinet process, we weren't asked to present that detail, and I don't understand how that further information about different elements of the fabric of the building. The conditions survey runs to some 120 lines of an Excel spreadsheet. I don't know how that would have added additional information that would have benefited the decision makers over and above the detail that we did provide within the report. Councillor Pritchard is absolutely right that a lot has changed since the 2019 survey. But as we've detailed in the report, it is likely that very likely, and Councillor Pritchard acknowledged this, it's very likely that actually the condition and therefore the cost of any repairs and maintenance liabilities will have increased. And we've tried to give some projections in relation to that also within the report. This is all detailed in the report. We also reference in the report that actually there's a current revenue budget for Pontland Firth Leisure Centre. We're quite careful at not saying what the future budget will be in terms of the sport and leisure facility offer from the adjacent Centre for Vulnerable Learners, which is due to open in the coming months. We're quite careful not to say what those costs would be, because at this point we don't know that detail. It depends on a number of elements in terms of exactly what the offer is going to be, apportionment of costs between our leisure services and the Centre for Vulnerable Learners. So that's detail that we need to work through. But what we can say with confidence, and again, this is referenced in the report, is that the future revenue budget will be significantly less than the current revenue budget. So it will be significantly less. We can't put precise pounds and pence to that, but we can state with confidence that it will be significantly less. That information is in the report. We don't talk about marketing of the land for sale for the future. We do reference the fact that at some point, depending on future decisions, that there could be a disposal, but there is a disposal process. And if there's a disposal of land or indeed property, then there could be a capital receipt. But again, within the report, we make it quite clear that this report and the current decision that's been called in wasn't about disposal of the land, and there's a larger site here. It wasn't about that. It makes it quite clear that that's subject to future decision making. And through this report, we're not in a position to say what the future of the value of the land might be. There's a whole host of constraints and factors such as planning consent, ground condition, etc., which would all influence any future potential capital receipt. And all of that is dependent on, as I say, decision making around future disposal of the site once the facilities have closed. This report only relates to the decision to close the 3G pitch once the Centre for Vulnerable Learners is open, and to keep the indoor leisure facilities closed. It doesn't deal with the future of the site beyond that. In terms of those additional costs of travel, and Councillor Pritchard, you referenced families in need and disabled people. So we don't define those costs, but we made it quite clear in our reporting in the report on the consultation responses that these were concerns that were brought out through the consultation. So again, for you as scrutiny members, you'll recall from the report that was brought forward last month, and for Cabinet as decision makers, all of this information was presented quite clearly, that it had been highlighted that there were concerns and potential negative impacts where users would have additional travel time or additional travel distances. However, we highlighted the fact that in terms of travel time, 75% of users at the Pontland Firth Leisure Centre responded in the public consultation that they accessed the site via private car. And we also referenced within the report the multiple other facilities that are available within a short driving distance. There were some users that actually arrived at Pontland Firth, used Pontland Firth Leisure Centre and arrived on foot. But again, we do reference the future provision of brand new facilities on the site immediately next door. Overall, I think I've addressed the points that Councillor Pritchard has raised. I don't believe that there was any material information that was missing from the report, as I say, and I've talked now at length, just reflecting on the information that we did include, which I think highlights that particular point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hartshorn. I noticed that Councillor Bishop and Councillor Owen have got their hands raised, but I had questions raised at the pre-meeting, which I'll take first. And the first one is Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Chair. I note that Councillor Owen is the lead on the call-in for a venue outside his own ward. Can I ask him to confirm in detail why he believes the financial figures quoted in the report are inaccurate? I note Councillor Owen didn't call in issues relating to the Risca hockey team when they were faced with issues with the removal of the Risca ATP that is in his own town. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McConnell. I'll go outside my normal strict observation of Owen, to allow Councillor Owen to respond to that. And may I say, before anybody challenges, even my daughter is the captain of Risca ladies hockey team. Councillor Owen.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of things to say with respect to Pontefraith Leisure Centre and the reason why I felt, excuse me, that I would support it. I was going to speak, well, I thought I was going to speak after Councillor Pritchard on that, but that hasn't happened. With respect to the question asked of me there, I think if you ask the Risca ladies hockey team what involvement I had at the time, I spoke to Leisure Services regarding the field, the fact that they had to move. That was Jeff, of course. We had a detailed conversation. I told him I didn't think it was right, etc. But again, it was a decision that was made, and you know, and has actually gone through the system now. Was made, such as this one is going as well. No, I didn't call it in. I can't remember exactly what was happening at the time at Risca. Certainly no of my co-Labour councillors were getting involved as far as I could see. I was the only one that was trying to make any ground. But as you know, it's quite hard when there's only 5 or 6 of us. And we tried to support each other, you know, in opposition, as it were. So that's my answer to that one. Now that I'm actually speaking, can I just say a little bit on the Pontefraith Leisure Centre while I'm on, or do I need to come back in after?
I'll call you back in, Councillor Owen. I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to a direct question.
Okay.
I can't comment on the level of support received by the other Labour councillors or independent councillors in Risca, because it's a matter of personal interest for me, because, as I've already stated, my daughter is the captain and coach of Risca Lady Hockey team. So I don't know if Mr. Tranter wants to make an observation there.
No.
Fine, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Adrian Hussey. And the reason I didn't call you in straight after Councillor Pritchard, Councillor Owen, is because I will always take people at the pre-meeting first. Councillor Hussey.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I know some of the points have been raised, but and like I say, Councillor Owen called this in, but the 3 played councillors, Councillor Whittle, Councillor Aidan and Judith Pritchard, have cited not enough financial information. Can I ask what information they wish to be added to the extensive data that have already been provided by officers? And as Councillor Morgan has explained, we got figures coming out of our ears, so I'd like to know what extra they would like. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hussey. I think Councillor Mr. Hudson, would you like to give a response to that before I?
No, thank you, Chair. No, I don't have anything to say in relation to that.
Yeah. Councillor Judith Pritchard's question's already been asked, so I'll go to Councillor Charlotte Bishop.
Thank you, Chair. And congratulations to your daughter for being captain as well. It's a very good team, so she must be extremely good.
Been captain for 5 years.
Oh,
Councillor Bishop.
amazing. Right, okay, sorry. Sidetracked, sorry, Chair. I didn't call this in. Unfortunately, I didn't see it in time. So my questions are the cost of closure and future use, sales and planning hasn't been taken into account from what I've just heard. Can I ask what the cost of vacant property inspections and security for the site were they taken into account when this was decision was made? Thank you.
Says.
So, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. So another detail of that isn't included within the report, but as I've also said, we will retain an existing revenue budget for the operation of the Centre for Vulnerable Learners. If there are ongoing costs associated with the retained but closed Pontyland Fright Leisure Centre site, then we will accommodate those within that budget. Of course, those costs will only last for as long as a decision is taken about the future use of the site. And once we've resolved this particular issue, then other colleagues will be able to move forward and progress decision making in relation to the existing leisure centre site.
Thank you. Councillor Bob Owen, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As I say, I thought I was going to speak after Councillor Pritchard because I was on the call in support of what she
And I
was
think
saying.
I've answered that question, Councillor Owen.
Okay.
You weren't at the pre-meeting,
Mr.
and
Chair.
I've taken the questions in the strict order which they were laid. So
Okay. Yeah, but I wasn't. I didn't think I was given a question. You asked initially of the ones that give a call in.
Councillor Owen,
was the reason?
Can you get on with your statement, please?
Okay. Well, as I say, we say we're a listening council. Well, we clearly are not listening to the people on this one. With the outcomes of the consultation, the clear need for the facility in terms of, the fact that it's got a full size 3G. And obviously, sorry. Yeah, the fact that we get the facility, we need a 3G now. We keep talking now about the COVID usage figures are there to be seen. So clearly, if we could have some of those people back in there, have we looked at that in terms of what that income generation would be versus the cost of maintenance? I don't recall that I've actually seen that. And officers keep going back to, well, when the site is open next door. Now, as fantastic as that site is going to be, the Centre for Vulnerable Learners, why keep on about it with reference to the pitch? Because the pitch is no good for full-time sports. So, so we're going to have this pitch. Yes, we are. And it'll be good. And it might be good for junior rugby teams and the like. But we cannot get football matches on there and rugby matches on there. So I don't know why we keep going down there. It is not a replacement. It is a 3G for usage, of course, but it's not going to allow people who are using Pontyland Fright to be able to then go there training, playing games. So, condition surveys, yes, and I've seen the figures and whatever. But if that centre was reopened and with the type of figures that were there pre-COVID and the generation of the income from that, has that been looked at versus then the cost of the maintenance? And also, I believe locally, we've talked of community asset transfers was looked at, and then one was looked at and that never happened, and there was another possible group. Well, clearly, those types of figures would really be good for them to look at to see whether there was a possibility that centre could be reopened and used, or are we worried then that if it's in the private sector, in terms of some kind of co-op movement, that they would actually be they would be competitors to us in other areas. So that is why I've signed it. And of course, on top of that, it's gone to court twice, and we haven't come out of that positively. So clearly, there's lots of things still to be considered, hence why I put my name to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Owen. Officers, would you like to respond? And please, no clapping from the gallery. I've made this clear before. Mr. Hartsham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'd just like to highlight that most of Councillor Owen's points were not related to the call-in. So the topic of the call-in is that there should have been further cost information to enable Scrutiny and Cabinet to consider the decision in front of them. But most of Councillor Owen's points were not about that. We can comment on those points if it's felt appropriate, but really we're revisiting lots of the material that's in the report and lots of the material that has already been considered by Scrutiny in relation to this particular report, and then also Cabinet, so issues around alternative facilities, for example. So I'll put all those matters to one side if that's okay, but obviously, Chair, if you want us to address those points again, then we can. Just in terms of costs, so again, we and potential for additional income from users if the facilities were to reopen. Then again, all of that is reflected in the report. We know that there was an existing requirement for a revenue budget pre-COVID, so when the indoor facilities were fully open and the 3G pitch, and there is a net cost to the council in operating those facilities. So we know that that's still the case. So to open the doors again, as Councillor Owen puts it, there would be some additional income, but there would still be a net cost to the council, which is in excess of, which would be in excess of the future revenue budget of the Centre for Vulnerable Learners. And no, that revenue budget wouldn't address the significant repairs liability that we've highlighted throughout the report. There would be a revenue budget, but not a budget that would be set aside to address all of those repairs that we've detailed throughout the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shane Williams, Vice Chair, wishes to ask a question, and then I'm going to ask somebody to do the recommendations that are laid out here. After Councillor Shane Williams has made his comments, I'll ask Mr. Chandler for an opinion on where we go from there.
Thank you very much, Chair. Not to be too repetitive, I think you've heard me on this subject quite a lot. But specifically on the costs, I've made my point clear in while being consulted on this. And I remember you come into Scrutiny, Rob, telling us that in this cost it needed a new floor. And I challenged that, and I said it might be nice to have a new floor, but it didn't need one. And I see that that's been taken out of these costs, and yet the costs still seem to be the same. But I don't know if we have had such a detail. And we've got this, the one email that we've had, and it's in the report now at page 12, where it says what the 3 priorities are. It doesn't break down what is needed. I've not seen where that's broken down. It says, for example, priority 202,000, essential work required within 2 years that will prevent serious deterioration. Now, that was in 2019. That's the report detailed from the condition survey. And yet, for 3 years, 4 years after that, it was used as a vaccine centre. So if that was essential work and it was needed to remedy a breach of health and safety legislation, was any of that money spent from 2019? Or was that money just left and nothing was spent? Because we have used it as a mass vaccination centre, and we're saying to those people that this is in breach of health and safety legislation because it's essential maintenance is required. So I don't understand our survey in 2019 can just be left idling by while we are using the centre and having lots and lots of vulnerable peoples in it. If that was broken down into more detail, then I think that we'd all be able to see and make a fuller decision. So that's my concern on some of the costs. That is specific to this call-in. I will just like to add one point, if you don't mind. I think it is picked up on what's being said, and it's in the report. And that is where people will go. I'm not sure why the pitch has to stay open, other than need, because it's clear it is need. And many teams can only play in the league, competitive sports, if they operate. So if they can't go to play out of Caerphilly or Western Mynach because they would be out of the catchment for the league. So what I would say is, we know that the mugger is not a replacement, as Councillor Owen has said. But where are they to go when this is obviously needed, in demand? Where are they to go? I do accept that might be not a specific point on this call-in, but I still would repeat that point because it is so essential for so many of the users. But my main point is the essential work and the expenditure on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Williams, and thank you for being well within time as well. Thank you very much. Officers?
So yes, thank you for pointing out that those last comments weren't related to the call-in, and you repeated comments that you've made before. But given that we're focusing on the subject of the call-in, we won't repeat the responses that we've given to those comments previously. So just in terms, so the detail is available for the condition survey. Obviously it's not secret, but I'm not sure it's that informative. I've got it in front of me. It relates to all elements of the building: mechanical, electrical, glazing, windows, gutters, floors, doors, roofs, walls. It relates to all the elements of the building. There are multiple rows where there are repair liabilities identified. I think it's common sense that we can understand that the situation will have deteriorated since that survey in 2019. The reference to the floor is that so the survey was undertaken in 2019, but from 2020, from a period after 2020, so after that survey, the facility was used as a mass vaccination centre that has caused damage to the floor. So the floor will need to be redone at a cost, at an estimate, because we had some similar work done at Newbridge when that was used as a mass vaccination centre, of I think some £30,000, something of that order. £30,000 isn't going to make or break the financial figures that we've set out within this report. The priority one works that you've referenced that are detailed in the report at 5.4. Their priority one is less than £4,000 worth that was identified. That is urgent work that would prevent the immediate closure. Those are health and safety related matters. So those items would have been done at that time. Otherwise the facility would have had to have closed. But there is just a small fraction of the total costs, and as we've indicated, we can be certain that the actual repairs liability will have increased quite considerably since that survey was undertaken in 2019. And then we also identify all of the other costs and liabilities and things to be taken into consideration if the facility was to remain open, including replacement of the 3G pitch surface, which is already beyond its estimated life. And we've identified, or we've estimated some of the costs that we think could be attributed to replacing that surface. So, in summary, there are lots of details throughout the report in terms of the financial costs. I've not heard anything from any of the councillors that have spoken so far about anything that's material and missing from the report. It's given me some confidence that we did provide all of the detail that members could reasonably be expected to have in order to make a decision around this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartson. Obviously, the Scrutiny Committee, I've already explained this, the Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. Can I come in to finish the debate?
Of course you can, Councillor Morgan.
Do we to do it now?
Hmm.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's just with regards to the call-in. With the full 2 pages of the report devoted to financial information, it's difficult to understand how it could be said that the decision was made without a proper examination of the true costs. The financial situation has been clearly set out and properly considered. The indoor leisure facilities have been closed for 5 years, and brand new facilities will be available for use next door within a few months. I so move. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. And I'll reiterate the Scrutiny Committee can decide if it wants to ask Cabinet to reconsider the decision or refer it to full Council. Note, if you decide to refer it to Council, we cannot make a decision to carry out a scrutiny function, and if we wish for it to be reconsidered, we need to go back to Cabinet anyway. Right, so I will need somebody to move and second the call-in, and we can go to vote. Is that correct, Mr. Tranter? Have I got my head around that?
Yes, you could. Yeah, you could. So the members of the Scrutiny Committee, you either support the call-in, which will effectively mean it goes back to Cabinet for the Cabinet to reconsider its decision, or you don't support the call-in and the decision of the Cabinet becomes effective forthwith. So that's basically that what you've got before you. So what I suggest, Chair, frankly, is that a poll goes up so that the members of the Scrutiny Committee can either vote for, yes, no, or abstain.
Thank you, Mr. Tranter. Members, you all understood that? Yep. And as in prior meetings, if there is a tie, the motion falls. If it's tied, or I have a casting vote.
You've got a casting vote.
I've got a casting vote. Right. Let's get that technicality out of the way. Can we have a voting slip up, please? Do we need somebody to move it and second it?
No, that's
No. I have the advantage of being able to see the voting figures before that tells me.
We have 7. Chair, we have 7 for the call-in to refer to Cabinet, back to Cabinet. We have 9 against referring the call-in back to Cabinet, and we have 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. That motion is now done, and we can move on to agenda item 5, which is the Housing and Environment Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme on pages 66 to 77. If members of the gallery would like to sit for the rest of the meeting, they're more than welcome to, but if they'd like to leave, I'll give them time to leave. Sorry. Because we didn't sound was thanks for your support. That's all. Okay. Agenda item 5, Housing and Environment Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme, pages 66 to 77.
Thank you, Chair. I'll refer members to the appendix of the report, and you can see that the next item for the Scrutiny Committee considers on the 29th of April. You've got 2 items planned. You've got the Caerphilly Local Area Energy Plan, and you've got the Improving Recycling Behaviour through further use of the Environmental Protection Act, which is a new item has been added. Following that, you've got the meeting on the 17th of June, where you'll have the Public Protection Annual Report, the Common Allocation Policy Decision, the Housing Revenue Account Budget Outturn, and you'll have an information item pack on Development and Governance Project Board Biannual Update. So unless there's any further items suggested by members, I'll ask members to move it for publication.
Yeah, I can't see any hands. Can we have a mover, please?
Move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hussey. Can we have a seconder?
Second, Chair.
Thank you. I think that was Councillor Cushing. Yeah, can we have a voting slip up, please?
Chair.
Yeah, unanimous, wasn't it? It was unanimous. Thank you very much. We can move on to agenda item 6 to consider the following cabinet reports, and none have been called in apart from agenda item 4.
Correct.
Correct, thank you. Agenda item number 7, notice of motion for Zane's Law, pages 79 to 90, and Councillor Skivins has brought this to our attention. He's online. Councillor Skivins.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, as usual, Councillor Skivins, you've got 5 minutes, and then we'll move on.
Okay, thank you, Chair. You have got the motion in front of you, but what I'd just like to add is that the area which we live in and have administration in has a legacy of our industrial past. Now we've seen.
Can I remind you, Councillor Skivins, you need to speak to the motion as submitted, not any periphery. So carry on, please.
It is related. There are a number of contaminated sites within our area, and there are approximately a large number in Wales. One of the unfortunate issues is that these can create situations which can harm humans. Zane's Law was created after the fatal incident occurred in another part of the country, but it is not unique. There are a number of young people which have lost their lives due to contamination, and there are also ongoing investigations. The motion seeks to gain support for a change in the legislation, particularly around the Environmental Protection Act, to try and return it back to its original intent, where it has been altered and watered down, in my personal view, to its original purpose, particularly on pursuing the polluter to pay the cost of the clear up or remediation. There are currently requirements on the local authority, which again are listed within the report. So Zane's Law seeks to reaffirm the roles of various levels of local authority and of government to try and resolve this issue and stop any harm or potential harm to human health. The motion is calling for the council to support this and write to the Secretary of State for Health, the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and the First Minister in Wales to express the council's support for change to the legislation and reaffirming the position of the local authorities' duties and responsibilities. There is an early days motion at Westminster, which has been supported by Baroness Natalie Bennett, and there is a debate due at Westminster on this very subject in early June. However, a number of local authorities across the country have supported it. So I've brought this motion here to Caerphilly. We have contaminated sites and we do have problem sites in our area. I hope that none of us would want any harm to come to humans or natural habitats. So we have an opportunity to support Zane's Law and seek to reaffirm the council's positions, lobby outside of our immediate responsibility, and try to seek a change in the legislation to reaffirm the environmental protection legislation. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skivins. You 30 seconds under. Well done. Councillor Adrian Hussey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a little bit of clarity. It's called Zane's Law, and obviously it was a tragic accident that happened to this little 7-year-old, but he wasn't actually he didn't actually die from the contamination from the local landfill. As his father, he was paralysed, but according to the report, he died from carbon monoxide poisoning that was admitted from the pumps when they was pumping the water from his house. So I'm a little bit thinking why it's called Zane's Law when he didn't actually die from contaminated stuff. The other thing in the report, it to say number 3, that the land register should be open to the general public for inspection. That does seem a bit mad if it's a dangerous place to go. At general public could go in there and inspect it. I don't know how they would inspect it. And the other thing that is going to put a financial burden on local authorities to remediate these sites if they are deemed to be dangerous. I think this should be, like as Councillor Skiven said, it's been debated in Parliament, and I think it should either be Westminster government or Welsh government should be footing the bill for this type of thing. Because of this, I don't think I'd be supporting this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hussey. Officers, do you have any comments?
I can just offer a couple of comments. It was just in relation to Councillor Skiven's introduction of the notice of motion. And I'm not aware of, he referenced the Environmental Protection Act 1990, which is principally where the current contaminated land legislation sits, as Councillor Skiven said. I'm not aware that there's any change from the original intent. Obviously, the guidance and statutory guidance has developed over time since that legislation was introduced in the early 2000s. But I don't think anything has changed in terms of intent. The legislation is there, does place duties on local authorities and to a certain extent Natural Resources Wales, but principally on local authorities in relation to the inspection and management of contaminated land. It is a risk-based approach, and there is proportionality. So proportionality in terms of considering burdens across burdens on individuals and companies and society as a whole. And there is a difference between land that has some potential contaminants and contaminated land for the purposes of the legislation. So the legislation has quite strict definitions to support a risk-based approach. So we do have existing duties in terms of inspecting contaminated land. There is a duty in terms of a public register for land which is determined as contaminated. And then, as Councillor Hussey has pointed out, if, as is detailed in the proposed Zanes law, if there was a requirement for a proactive inspection of all potentially contaminated land, which I think is what's being proposed, then that would require significant additional resources for local authorities if local authorities were to undertake those works.
Thank you, Mr. Hartshorn. On my list is Councillor Chakran Dawson, then Councillor Bishop. Councillor Chakran Dawson, please.
I think it was partly answered, because I was going to ask what policies or strategies have we got in place to already deal with these kind of incidences?
So yes, thank you, Councillor. So as I say, the local authorities already have responsibilities under the legislation in respect of contaminated land. We do have a contaminated land inspection strategy. It sets out a risk-based approach to inspecting contaminated land and taking forward remediation of contaminated land. In practice, most potentially contaminated land is remediated through the development control process, so through planning. So most of the work is done when planning application is submitted. We're aware of perhaps some former historical use, and that can be quite broad. Obviously, we would want any future development to be fit for purpose, and that would usually be the mechanism by which brownfield sites, for example, is effectively remediated and cleaned up and rendered fit for development.
Thank you, Mr. Hartshorn. Yeah, Councillor Bishop.
Thank you, Chair. So, if I get this right, the Environmental Act outlines that the local authority has a duty of care currently, as well as NRW, to ensure contaminated land is dealt with safely and appropriately. Is that right? So a cost really isn't an issue, as Councillor Hussey suggested, and surely at cost, which we all pay our council tax, even the parents of these children, isn't a factor in children's lives. We have a duty of care to protect the children of our county, or the people of our county, especially the children in my eyes, and this is a matter of safeguarding as well as a duty of care to the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Officer said, give a response to that.
Yeah, I think I can offer a response. So yes, there are duties as I've outlined within the legislation, but it is a risk-based approach. So what that means is that there isn't an intrusive investigation of every parcel of potentially contaminated land. It's a risk-based approach. So assessments are undertaken based principally around what we already understand about former uses of the site, if it's land that's been filled, what it might have been filled with. And the legislation does have built within it this element of proportionality. So on the basis that not all land that has some contaminants in it would be remediated. So the legislation uses language such as around there would need to be the significant possibility of significant harm. So that's where the legislation is pitched at. So there is an assessment of risk, and it doesn't mean that every single piece of land that may or may not have a chemical within it is naturally cleaned up through this process, because it just may not be proportionate to do so.
Thank you, Rob.
So, sorry, can I come back
Skibbins,
with two sites that I
hold
know
on.
are contaminated?
Councillor Bishop, just hold on 2 ticks. I'll come back to you now. Councillor Skibbins, you've got your hand raised. You're not a member of this committee. You've introduced the motion, so I can't take any further questions from you. Councillor Bishop.
So Castleview, where children's wellies melted off their feet before the houses were built and it was dealt with, wasn't an issue because, you know, clearly it was. And also the former tar works in Caerphilly where people have been gassed. And this is a risk element that is not being dealt with. Yet people are still walking there, still putting their lives at risk because they're unaware of the dangers. So how are we safeguarding these people, which is risk management? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. I think Mr. Hartson's covered down the previous question, but if he wants to add anything else.
Yeah, so Councillor Bishop, I'm not aware of those particular incidents that you're referring to. Castle Gate, I think, is what you're referring to, and as one of those sites, and that site has obviously been developed and actually through the planning process. So the land was remediated through the development process as the housing development was being progressed. There were conditions attached to the planning consent that dealt with all of these issues. So investigations had to be undertaken, proposals for remediation had to be submitted and approved, and then actually implemented. So that's exactly how these sorts of sites would be cleaned up. If you're referring to if the other incident relates to the tar plant site, then again there has to be significant possibility of significant harm, but there also has to be a pollutant linkage. So again, I go back to the fact that there is a contaminant on a parcel of land doesn't mean that there's a pollutant pathway, doesn't mean that there's significant possibility of harm, and doesn't mean that it's contaminated land for the purposes of the legislation. So it is a proportionate approach it's intended to be a proportionate approach and sets out a proportionate risk-based approach to managing the historical industrial legacy that is across the whole country.
Thank you, Mr. Hartshorn. Right, I need somebody to move the motion and second it. May I remind
Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Have I got a seconder?
Second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cushing. May I remind Councillor Skibbins that he's not allowed to vote on this? Can we have a voting slip, please? Yeah, the motion has failed. Thank you very much, members. I'll now move on to agenda item 8, vacant property presentation by Nick Taylor-Williams, who's now calling this in externally.
Evening, everybody. I'll just try and share my screen, and then we'll get going. Oh no, wrong one. Sorry. 1 second. Stop sharing that. Sorry. Try again. And sorry. I can't see it now. 1 second. Oh, where am I?
If you're having technical difficulties, Nick, I can move to 8 and 9 because they're.
Yes, please. That would be helpful. Just to let me find this again. Apologies.
Yeah, can you email Emma the presentation and we'll load it up that way? But while we're waiting for that, we could move to agenda item 9 on pages 91 to 100. Recommendations on page 92. We just asked to note the contents of the report, so there's no vote. So Leslie gets a very comfortable evening. Thank you very much. I've got some questions on it, but I'll go to them now. Councillor McConnell, got a question on this agenda item 9?
No, Chair, it was declaring an interest.
That's correct. Sorry, Councillor McConnell. Councillor Marina Chaka-Dawson.
Thanks, Chair. My first question was, why is there an under recovery of leaseholders' fees? I don't know if you want to answer that question first, or do you want me to give them all the questions?
You can do 2, and then I'll move to somebody else. And if we've got time, I'll come back.
I'd like to understand the disrepair works, why it's increased, increased claims and legal fees. Why there are increased claims and legal fees?
Leslie?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. And to answer the first question on the leaseholders' fees, a few years ago, well, currently we charge them £10 a year for the work that we do from housing, and we have been trying to review it for a number of years. And a few years ago, we agreed to increase that to £199 a year, which was sort of in par with other authorities. But as we looked at that, it was clear within their current contracts we couldn't do that. So we put more income in than we can actually get. So we had to reduce the income back down. So that's why it's an underspend.
Right.
In terms of the disrepair, you're quite right. It's gone up quite a lot. In 22-23, we paid £56,000 for disrepair claims. In this current year, we're projecting £379,000. So there is a huge, significant increase. And most of that is legal fees, unfortunately. About 86% of that is actually either our legal fees or the third-party legal fees. It's something out of our control at the moment. There's a lot of claim farms out there trying to get business from our tenants, but it's something we are looking at.
Thank you. Councillor Pritchard, Judith.
Yes. 2.1 says the majority of council tenants' rent is funded from housing benefits. I believe it's 77%, which are derived from the taxpayer's purse, and therefore value for money must always be sought. Well, it's not just because of housing benefit that value for money must always be sought. It should be sought for the 23% of council tenants who pay their own rent. And even if we had some extra from grant funding, that would be, because it's public sector, that would be from taxpayers' money as well. So I think this is a bit unfortunate. I mean, especially in view of the fact that the new chief executive is very keen on customer service and calls residents, etc., customers now. So, can I point out that we should always, as an authority, look for value for money? I think this is just poorly drafted. The question I've got two questions really. There's a mention in 532 about decoration allowances. Well, I thought that we weren't allowed to give people money to decorate their own homes now. We used to do that. We would give them an imperfect house and then give them some money to decorate, etc. But I thought that with the new Welsh Government rules that we can't do that, and the house has to be decorated by us or contractors, etc., before people move in. So can I have a comment on that? And then in 583, I see there's a 16.2, I think, underspend on capital expenditure. So we're going to reprofile the amount we spend on capital expenditure, and it's because of resource issues. Now, do these resource issues include not being able to recruit staff in a timely fashion? Because I think there's another mention of resource issues or implication later on. So I'm very concerned that our HR department is not advertising the jobs quick enough and not reacting quick enough. Is that the case?
I don't think that's the subject of the report, Councillor Pritchard, but I'll allow officers to answer.
Perhaps we can be told
Councillor Pritchard, let's
resource issues are.
Leslie.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. We are paying some decoration allowances. I can't give you in particular instances, but I can get some of that information if you require it. But I don't have the details tonight, unfortunately. But that is just a reason why there's an underspend in that particular area. In terms of the underspend for capital, there's a variety of reasons why there's an underspend. It's not just about resources, and it could just be resources from a contractor point of view as well, not just in-house staff. But again, if you require more detail, I'm sure we can give you some of that information.
Yeah, thanks. I think that'll be fine if that information could be forthcoming. Councillor Ingram-Jones.
I just wanted to clarify something. On page 97, HRA Public Sector Housing, there's a figure built in for Lansbury and Gregrack neighbourhood offices. Are they open constantly now? Because I know they were centralised at one point, weren't they?
I can answer that one if you'd like.
Nick's gonna answer that one, Leslie.
Yeah, the council offices were part of a paper we took a while back now to close all the local housing offices. All the local housing offices were agreed to be closed, and so they are just holding costs for those facilities until we have a longer term view on what we're doing with those particular buildings. So that's why that would be in the report.
Thank you, Nick. Councillor Chakran Dawson, and then I'm going to move on after yourself.
Just one little question, on a big one. Major repair allowance, what is the criteria for this to be spent?
Leslie.
Thank you, Councillor. It's only to be spent on housing assets. It can only be spent on improving existing assets. It can't be spent on demolition, and it can't be spent on new builds. So there's a variety of criteria within it, and it basically is funding our current WHQS programme.
Thank you, Leslie. Right, there's no vote required on this. So I think Nick's ready with his presentation. So we go back to agenda item 8, which has been forwarded to Emma. There was some background noise, which was muted now. So if anybody wants to know the answer to the question on pointless, they'll have to submit to a recording. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that technical glitch there. So this paper, this presentation, I'll go through it quite quickly. There's quite a bit of information, but I felt it was necessary to give this much information to give a full and rounded picture of where we are of our vacant property management at the moment. And I think this was called by Vice Chair Shane Williams, Councillor Shane Williams, a few meetings ago. But there's a lot of work that's been going on in the background on this for a long period of time, and even some more recent focus of work through modernising Team Caerphilly work plan. But the reason it's here is because we can do better, and we need to do better, and we need to improve our performance within this arena. There is a housing crisis, as everyone knows, and we need to do the best that we can to bring our properties back into use as quickly as possible. So the good news is that it is improving, but we've still got a bit of a way to go, and I'll run through some headlines with you this evening. So I'm going to go very quickly through quite a bit, but I'm going to look at stock profile. I'm going to look at our property management revised procedures and processes, legislation and standards. Going to look at targets, our KPIs. Going to look at vacant property process example, which really tease out some of the areas that we're looking to focus to improve the service. Going to pull out something around what the delays are and what some of the reasons why we're not performing as well as we'd like. I'm going to look at the categorisation around our properties, which has been subject of some FOI and an email recently. Look at workforce, location of that, and workforce trends and capacity. Going to then come on to costs, and also talk briefly about temporary accommodation. And then I'm going to look at some comparisons amongst our peers. And I'm also going to just touch on council tax premiums, a request from Councillor Owen and a discussion I had with Councillor Owen recently, and then conclude on some of our solutions. So quickly run through our stock profile. Some of you will know this, but just as a refresher, this is kind of what our properties look like. So nearly 60% is our houses, flats, and a small proportion of bungalows. When you look at our property size, so this is slightly out of date, so 10,660, I think it's now something like 10,682. You can see the split between the tenure and the bed and the sizes of property. So we've got about 18% are 1 beds, 34% are 2 beds, 46% 3 beds, and just over 1.5% as 4 beds. We've got 72 different locations. I'll show you a map shortly across the borough. 70% of our stock is designed as general needs, so no special needs required for that property, and the rest is designed as later living or sheltered stock. We also manage about 405 leaseholders, so that's not subject to our maintenance and our vacant property. But for a landlord of our size, circa 11,000 properties, a target that we should have in mind at any one time during the course of the year, around about 100 properties, so just under that 1% would be a good benchmark to have. And when you look at the age profile of our properties, you'll see that we've got some quite old properties, as a lot of you will be aware, with 80% of our properties within that chunk, built in that chunk of 1945 to 1974. To maintain those properties that are older and more intensive management requirements, notwithstanding the fact that we met certain requirements in the past, are going to have more issues because of the age of that stock. This is the location of our properties. Again, a lot of you will know this, but kind of around town centres, but a good split across up and down the valleys, and kind of the concentration, those higher numbers you would expect within those more urban areas. And that's important about how we distribute the workforce and how we look at things. So what we've been doing recently is just revising what we need to get to. What is our procedures? What are our processes? What are our standards? Taking the old and refreshing them and getting them up. So the process and the procedure should be about minimising rent loss, and I'll talk about that later. Reducing the vacant period through effective cost management and coordination, ensuring that we can re-let those properties within agreed target times. We ensure that repairs to the properties are undertaken to enable ourselves to meet the standard, but also to make sure there's appropriate rechargeable repairs and costs are identified, so that can go back to the community housing team and recharge where necessary. Make efficient use of the vacant periods to carry out the upgrading and major repairs and appropriate coordination with our emerging asset management strategy, making sure that we are delivering this in a timely way. And most important, and should be the first one on here, making sure that we achieve high standards of customer satisfaction when the properties are being back in at the beginning of contract. So our performance management objectives need to be reduction in average relet times, making sure we get value for money for all properties in works, reduction in the numbers of properties, using our new procedures and management objectives to assess workforce trends, review longer term vacant properties, again, which I'll come on to, and where we might need to look at a different financial appraisal process of how we deal with those properties due to cost. Operation, making sure that the vacant property procedure is reviewed regularly, and making sure we get quarterly reporting of that and looking at comparisons with other LAs, which again, I will come on to later. This is a snapshot of our new vacant property standard. It is a long document, so I've just pulled out some highlights for the purpose of this slide. In terms of what we expect and what we should be delivering our properties into what standard. In the past, the lettable standard had been slightly lighter than this, and this is more intense due to various reasons. I'll come on to legislation, but I just wanted to pick out a couple of highlights within here. Only decoration where it is required as a requirement within the standards. Looking at kitchens, where we do have something that will need where cupboards or worktops should match as closely, and if current worktop cupboard out of stock, we get to the closest match to avoid potentially unnecessary removal of kitchens that are relatively new in age. Equally, when you look at bathrooms as well, if there is a slight staining to that, that we highlight to that to the incoming contract holder and make sure that the flooring, etc., is addressed and free from hazards, to avoid maybe some practices of the past where we would be potentially stripping out relatively new bathrooms. It wasn't consistently the approach, but making sure we get this written down correctly in the new property standard is very much important. There's a number of other areas which are standard around there, but then some of the miscellaneous stuff is linked to the future. Is linked to the future of the emerging WHQS 23 standard, which we've talked about in the past. Looking at modelling that and the works that we need to model that, because there is new legislation coming into play. The new WHQS amendments are looking at flooring as standard, making sure we do decoration where needed. Comes back to the question earlier around the decoration allowances. We need to make sure that we can model where practical at void stage now to get to an EPCC, an Energy Performance Certificate of C, which is a rating of SAP 75. If we can do those works now, because some of them will be quick wins, like light bulbs and stuff like that, where to just tip them over the edge. There'll be other quick wins in terms of draft or anything else like that. We will do that now. And we've also, as standard, now been delivering environmental sensors, installing those which can manage the temperature, humidity, and we get some trend analysis on that in terms of informing how we manage that property going forward. So we've got to take that into light as well. If we start to look at some of the older targets that we had, they're not fit for purpose. We're in the process of reviewing those, and we're not there yet. But they were based around cost and then time. Well, I'll give you some illustrations later around cost as to why this is not the right sort of target that we need to have, because the majority of stuff, not all, the majority of some of the works that were coming through, particularly some of the older properties, were just getting put into that 29+ day category, which isn't the right category. So we've been toying with how to extrapolate that, maybe providing a longer categorization of working days against cost. But this won't always work for every kind of type of property. You'll probably need something for a shelter stock. You may need something for a 4-bed house, a 3-bed house, to you would have on a 1-bed flat. And I'll come on to length of time in works in a minute. So this is work in progress, and something that we would need to keep under review as we go through this process. I'm going quite fast because I want to get to this example. So this is a process flow example of a vacant property that we had last year. And it's a really useful illustration. because it does, for me, show where the pinch points are and where we can improve. This is actually a query that came in from one of council members, and we worked through it, and we unpacked it and looked to explain, and we're using it now as an example. So it's really it's an interesting example. So in September we were handed the keys. So the void process is from keys to keys. So keys in to keys handed out back to the tenant, and that should be our timelines. I think in the past, targets, etc., were very much focused around the actual time in work. So I think we need to look at the targets around from keys to keys, because there are clearly delays with across the whole process. So our security secured that on the day. We then capped off utilities. It was then passed to the surveyor a couple of days later. It took them about 2 weeks to then undertake the survey. Looking at some of my stats around levels of surveys outstanding, and I'll touch on it in a minute, that isn't by no means the longest delay in terms of getting the surveying done. The works order was then raised. Then an estimated date was provided. We've reviewed this and looked that there's communication breakdown between some certain parts of the team where that may have been flagged as the estimated handback date. But that is just linked against an old KPI. So we need to improve the communication between the teams to not mismanage expectations of some of our incoming contract holders, tenants, and make sure that we are more, the communication flow is far better to make sure that expectation management of estimated handback is not linked to a works timeline or a works KPI. I've highlighted some of the works there that were necessary against cost for illustrative purposes, and then it moves into the foreman taking on the void work, and then completing the actual works that were put in the works order. We've also been trialing different things with our supply chain and our supplier, and we were trialing that point in the year. It's become a little bit more streamlined now. But we were trialing key safes and dropping materials to the voids, and there was a delay in this process where the key safe wasn't working correctly. They couldn't drop the materials. There was some delay in some of the processes that we were implemented to speed our delivery up, but some teething problems there. But that wasn't where this one ended. So it moved into, we had to then look to paint the property. We then looked at how to floor the property. This landed over towards the Christmas period. The offer to the painter was delayed. They gave us a target date because we were short of the decorating contractors. Then there was a sickness delay. Then there was Christmas. So there wasn't a rescheduled start until early January. We had to wait for the painting to be done so the flooring could be put in. The flooring there was input in. Then there was another inspection required, and the viewing didn't take place until the 3rd of February. So that was a long time between September to February, which for what is a one-bedroom flat, which should be far, far smoother. The property that was then let in February, the 11th of February. But as is ever our challenge and our churn that we have with our tenants, the property was then void again on the 22nd of February as that individual had to move and had to leave. So I think I've dwelled on that process flow because I think that gives a really good example of issues that we're dealing with, and has enabled us to get some lessons learned from that to improve the service going forward. I wanted to just talk about property categorization, and this is where some of the stats were shared in the past externally via FOI and email, looking at our overall vacant. It's not as clear a picture as just saying there are 361 vacant properties in November 2024, because there was a lot of categories within that. And when you look at what it looks like in the latest I did for this presentation, we have 334 that are technically vacant within our categorization, but 40 of those are pending letting. 26 of those are held or pending redevelopment, which are largely our sheltered stock. We've got other reasons that are held for management, etc. So that figure, the 257, which is those that are in safety, security and survey, and those that are in housing repair, are the kind of number that we need to get that down. We absolutely need to get that down. And when you look at the number that are actually the 75 there at that first category, the lion's share of that is in survey. And I'll come on to some of the delays. we have a shortage of surveyors in order to kind of get through some of that. And also a stat that was shared publicly was around the length of delay and the length of time the property was vacant, sorry. And I've just done some analysis which I think is quite illustrative. We are nowhere near where I would want us to be, but it is not as bad as the 218 that was shared previously. So when you look at some of our older properties that have been sheltered refurb properties that have taken a long time to refurb, and you strip out some of those properties that are there and causing greater anomaly within the stats. When you strip out all of those properties, there was 62 one beds in that about 257, and that average delay was 88 days vacant. When you look at the 2 beds, using the same analysis, and there were some schemes there that were held for viability reasons. And what I mean held for viability issues is that the works are looking to cost more than the property value. And we need to take a view on that. And that's why we're looking at developing a stock options appraisal, which looks at how we deal with those properties that are costing more than the value of the property to bring up to standard. It's going to become a bigger issue when we get into WHQS 2023 delivery for decarbonisation as well. And then 149 days for 3 beds. So it stands to reason that you should be able to turn the 1 beds around quicker than the 2 beds and the 3 beds, etc. But it gives a more granular understanding of the issue we are grappling with compared to what was previously shared externally. So the delays that we're experiencing, and the reason why we got on some of these delays, we got the delays in the surveying due to lack of capacity. We did have a contractor framework that we were working through. It's taken a while to work through and get some efficiencies through that contractor framework, make sure the right contractors in there, we can give out bigger numbers of jobs, and that is now in place. We also had issues with our energy utility provider that used to kind of switch on, switch off, and take the readings and speak to the tenant, etc. That was taking up to 12 weeks to do that alone. So we're looking at retendering that and looking at that at the moment in terms of streamlining that process. There's a level of training of staff underway at the moment around how, particularly within the surveying arena and other things around our standard. We're having to now do the SAP and EPC modelling. Over the course of the last few years, we've been changing our IT systems as well, and our IT systems about how we work out in the field, but equally our asset management database and how we schedule the workforce. That's in a state of flux, and that is progressing and improving. That's another reason why there may be some inefficiency. We also have mentioned the lockable deliveries and supply changes of process, contractor availability, how we manage our contracts. Are we getting the best efficiency out of our operatives, which we're reviewing, and that increased specification that we've talked about. But a lot of the current bottleneck is around need for more surveyors, and we are addressing that corporately to try and speed through some of this work. Just want to touch on workforce. Touch on workforce. So the way we manage this, we have 3 area teams: north, south, east. We have 1 vacant property foreman looking at that. We've got in total 235 operatives across all of our workforce, but that's the number of operatives that are currently focusing in on the void works. And again, I'll show you where that's split and how it's split against contractor, another area under review in terms of our capacity across all the different work streams we have, whether we put more internal resource into that. And the foreman manages that whole process, manages the relationship with contractors, manages the relations in-house team, and gets the quality assurance work completed. So if we look at the spreads, this is taken from mid-February from the snapshot, location and where in works. You can see that there's a higher level in repair in north and east than there is in south, and this gives you an idea of that week commencing, how many were received into works and how many were handed back. If you do a trend analysis across a number of weeks, I've done a 5-day trend analysis there. You can see that we're kind of just treading water. We're dealing with what's coming in and handing back. We're not really making inroads necessarily over that snapshot to get into that backlog and to try and get that total number down. Again, this has been invaluable review in order for us to kind of earmark where we might refocus workforce attention. This is a slide between contractor versus our in-house team, and overall it's about a 50-50 split. there's areas that just these stats have led me to kind of review since I've kind of been looking at all of this over recent months, whether we need to redress the balance, whether we need to look at whether we need to increase contractor coverage, or whether we need to increase in-house coverage for certain areas like north and east. But it's a useful illustration of how we split between the in-house workforce and contractor workforce. Now this is moving on to costs. This is a snapshot of costs, which is I'm using this data because it illustrates how many we're against our old KPIs. So for the purpose of this, don't get too fixated on that 10 million, because in actual fact, last year's total costs were more like 16 million, but I didn't have the stats against the 16 million to illustrate against these KPIs. But this is used to illustrate that how many are in the 8-day category and very low level of cost on average, and how many of the works were within the higher category, which are a much higher level of cost. So pretty much 50-50, 400 in the higher and 376 in the lower. And that kind of illustrates just the varying degrees of the works that are required to our properties. Also, as shared publicly recently, was around, well, what does this all mean in terms of costs, in terms of to the council, notwithstanding the capital costs to deliver the programme? What does that mean if they're vacant? What does that mean in terms of rent loss? Well, at the moment, there's about 1.5 million. Well, last year was £1.5 million rent loss alone in terms of our vacant property. But when you break that down, it's quite illustrative and goes back to the process flow of keys to keys. 34% actually held. They're held for management reasons. They're the longer term stuff. So the rent losses on the longer term schemes that need to be redeveloped and reviewed and looked through, largely are sheltered stock. Then third of that is those that are 29-day plus and in repair. And that's the key one that we do need to drive down. But then equally, there's 20% at the beginning and the end of the process. And we need to squeeze that process, relook at that process to address the end-to-end process. And what I've done in recent months is look to review some of the structure, particularly within what I'm now calling the community housing team. And we're bringing in a new team that is going to focus solely on the moving homes. So new tenancies, new keys, induction, the contract, but equally linking up to our repairs team to make sure that process at that end, both at the end and the beginning, is streamlined more. So we've got more capacity to deal with that. And it also frees up more capacity for the community housing officers to focus out in the community on their patch and their portfolio of households. Equally, has been raised is our temporary accommodation costs. Now, there is a link to here, but not as significant as I think has been drawn upon. We have close to £6 million of temporary accommodation costs. And we have got over, as of December 2024, we had over 400 households in TA. And I just want to illustrate from this slide, don't necessarily need you to read it all, but this is just an illustration of our single persons. So we have the total at the bottom is the total households in temporary accommodation, but we currently have 277 single households in TA. Well, that's at December 2024. And if you look at the increase over the year, that increased by 36 single person households in TA. When you look back to the previous slide, we put back into circulation over 800 properties. About 30% of those were one beds, but equally, it's not just us as a landlord. It's not just us as a landlord that are providing properties through the common allocation policy. It is our other landlords across the county borough as well. And if you look at our stock, as I said at the beginning, 18% of our stock is one beds. So our greater level of coverage is in the higher. But there's a lot of work that is done before people even get into TA, and they're at risk of homelessness, and we work across the team so that they try and get them before they even get onto TA. So there's a lot of work there, but there is a lot of constant churn. So there was a lot of constant churn, and not all on TA will actually be eligible for housing in accordance with the CAP policy as it currently stands, and we are reviewing the CAP policy to make it more transparent, make it easier for people to understand where they are on the waiting list, whether they're in TA on the waiting list or on the waiting list in general, of which there's nearly 6,400 on our waiting list. Not all in TA will be seeking permanent housing within this local authority, and referrals may be out into other local authorities where duty is given outside of this county borough. There could be potential investigations on intentionality. Have you been made yourself intentionally homeless, or an application may be under investigation because of that. And they wouldn't maybe not all be eligible, as I said, to be on the waiting list, and some may have suspended applications. So there's a number of reasons why, yes, you could say a proportion of that £6 million TA cost could be attributed to this, and yes, it would be improved. And we will improve that as we work through some of the change process we've got in place, but it would not extinguish a sizable proportion of that TA cost alone if it was just linked to TA. Come to the last few slides now. This is a really interesting one for me. Although the most recent stats haven't been published, they're not published until April for last year. So this is the stats from 2022-23, and I've can't say it. I blanked out every other council that's on here, but this is the 11 stock owning local authorities and how we compare with others. So percentage of stock vacant for less than 6 months, we're mid-table. 6th in that percentage of stock that is greater than 6 months, we're in the bottom third. We can do better, obviously do better. We can do better on all of these, but in total stock vacant in that categorisation, we're in the bottom third as well, which I thought was a useful indicator. And I'll be looking at the new stats in a few weeks when they come out to see where we do rank. And it's good to have benchmarks like that to see where we fare against other local authorities. Just wanted to say very quickly before I conclude with some last 2 slides. I had a good discussion with Councillor Owen around empty property premiums. Now, empty property premium is a different categorisation in total to vacant properties. We may have got some properties which we've actually taken out of debit, which means they're not part of that rent loss figure. So we would be taken out because they're no longer due a rent, because we know we're no longer going to let them. They're part of a redevelopment plan. They're part of a sheltered housing plan. And I've looked at all of those properties that would be longer term empty, which is over 6 months. This is taken from the end of January stats. And of that, 140 of those are actually our sheltered housing stock that are held or in the process of decant or redevelopment. We'll still be, if we're not sufficiently progressive, then we'd still have to pay the empty property council tax premium. But there's a reason why that is there. There are another 34 longer term properties that we really do need to address to ensure that we're not paying premiums on those. But there is a reason around some of those in terms of viability issues. I think there was a couple that had infestation issues that we haven't been able to resolve. But I just wanted to share this because it's a little bit clearer in terms of how the empty property tax premium addresses links to the vacant properties. I did mention up front, there's the last 2 slides, that we've got a lot of focus from our Mobilising Team Caerphilly programme. We've had a lot of great support from the in-house team and the consultants team on there, looking at our end-to-end process. In the last month or so, they've been looking at that, helping us in our journey that we've had over the last few years to really focus our attentions and understand where we need to improve from end to end, from tenant departure all the way back through to occupancies. There's been a lot of work there. So just lastly on some of our solutions, and I've touched on some of the solutions, and we're in a journey here, and we're not where we need to be, but we are making progress. So I've mentioned earlier, change of structures, now having a dedicated moving homes team, which I'm hoping that will speed up some of the end-to-end process. There is a change of standard, a change of procedure, and a change of systems, all in the attempt to be more automated, more efficient, and to move us on. We now have the new contractor framework, the MTC deep dive, as I've just mentioned. We're close to drafting our stock options appraisal, which will be linked into WHQS viability, which will really give us an idea about those viability challenges and hopefully have those vacant properties won't be sat as vacant, because we'll have a clear idea of how we deal with them. Accuracy of data processing, we're getting far better with the new systems and how we can look at data and how we can process that, and that will help us. And making sure that our forecasting, I mentioned very early on, our forecasting and expectation management of customers, this is one of the key issues to make sure we get that right. And lastly, I have mentioned that we are going through a common allocation policy review, and I think that was just referenced earlier for the forward work programme, and we'll be bringing that to scrutiny in due course, and that will speed up some of the allocation process as well. So a lot to get there. Sorry if that took a little bit too long, but I wanted to give you a comprehensive view of all the work that's in play at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Interesting to see some of those statistics. On local government reorganisation in 1976, Brisker Urban District Council had 14,000 council houses. And that's, that gives you some idea of where we've moved to in terms of a number of things.
And I think that's largely, sorry, Chair, I think that's largely due to the right to buy and the hemorrhaging of the council stock.
Of course it is, Nick. And I wonder what I was doing in 1976 when most of you weren't born. Rita, Councillor Chapman Dawson, you've got a question?
Yeah, I've changed my question because I think you've quite Nick, you've quite answered the question very comprehensively. So earlier in the slides, you talked about a property. You went through the different stages and said a property was let, but then they let it go 11 days after. If the property's left immediately, say within a week or so, can it be relet straight away, or do you have to do something else to it?
We don't, in that instance, it would be fit to relet immediately. So unless in the week that the tenant was in there, something untoward happened. The assumption is that just goes back into the mix. It goes back to the new moving homes team. Once it's in place, we get it straight back out again. You go to the next person on the highest up on the housing register to reallocate. I should have said, if there's any questions, detailed questions around the allocation process, Kerry Demon joined me this evening. Sorry, I should have said that earlier. So Kerry's on there to answer anything I can't cover on an allocation question, but we would get that straight back into circulation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. But what I don't want to do is tie this up on ward-specific issues. So if we could keep it on the general and broad strategic issue, I would be appreciated. Councillor Ingram-Jones.
I was just confused with the figures, actually. I can't remember the figures exactly. When you're back to the number of operatives, we were looking at in-house, and in the north, I think it was the highest amount of in-house operatives.
Yeah.
And yet when we went to the next slide, then it was showing, I think it was the lowest operatives, in-house operatives, with the highest contractors.
Sorry, I'll just get to that slide.
I should have wrote it down. You went through it quite quickly.
No, sorry, I was conscious of time and much to get through and wanted to give chance for questions. So in the north, we have 25 operatives. In the south, we have 15 operatives, and in the east, we have 17 operatives. I think what that may have confused there is the order that I gave them. It was a different order. So I did north, east, south next. So apologies for that.
Yeah, but with the north, then when you look at the next, I think it was the next slide, it said the number of in-house was really low compared to contractors. Well, what are those high? We got the highest number of operatives. What are they doing then if his contractor's doing the work?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that what this stats have highlighted to me, that we need to address certain areas. So in the north, the stat that I gave there was 69 properties, 23 in-house. There's the most operatives. So I need to redress that balance. Right. That's one of the things we need to review. And this process over recent months and the focus that we've had from MTC has led me to look at that in earnest.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you. I can't see anybody else's hand up. Yeah, Vice Chair, go ahead.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Chair. Nick, thank you for the presentation. I think it was very comprehensive, very detailed, and it was great to see. On one of the slides where you said about repairs and that sometimes they would go into the 29 plus days category, and now you've trying to recategorize by how much repair would be needed so that it's a bit more specific than putting them in a 29 plus day category. But I suppose they are, but are they, whenever they go into that type of category, are they sort of checked to see where they are in terms of ready for repair, or how far down along the line are for repair? Because I think some people see houses left in vacant for such a long time. Obviously, they wouldn't know the full reasons behind it. But I just wondered whether we keep tabs on where that particular property is in line for repair, or is it, because sometimes you can go into 29 plus days and it can be forgotten with, if you not, for want of a better word.
No, absolutely right. The right challenge and right question. I think maybe in the past that hasn't been as good as we could have been, but we definitely recognise now that maybe people were looking at a categorisation and maybe just working towards that target. And I want to absolutely move away from working to a target, which might be 29 plus, when we know that that could and should be possible to be delivered far more efficiently. So it's definitely something that we are reviewing again as part of this overall review to make sure that is the case. We are using better data analysis now. We're using better systems. We can monitor things in a better way. I can get trends analysis from it all. I can pin that point to the teams. So we're not there yet, but we're definitely on the right track to ensure that some of those historic issues don't occur frequently in the future.
Thank you for that, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. With the matter of this is just for noting. I know some councillors have asked to have the slides distributed. I think that's
absolutely fine.
Yeah, absolutely. But in case anybody wants to know what I was doing in 1976 on local government reorganisation, I was an apprentice painting decorator in the Voids team for Usker Urban District Council. So there we are. Whoever thought I'd be sat up here. Thank you, Nick. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thanks. Cheers.
Yeah, but before I became the Assistant Chief Housing Officer for repairs in 93. Item 10 is for the recommendations on page 101. There is no vote required and it's for noting only. So I'm quite prepared, if everybody's happy, to conclude the meeting at that point. Thank you very much for Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say it's Kath's last scrutiny meeting as she retires on the 4th of April. And I would like to offer her all the best for the future and hope that she has a happy retirement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cushing. I introduced that at the start of the meeting.
I couldn't hear the meeting, sorry, Chair. Sorry, Chair, I couldn't hear the meeting.
Oh, that's okay. Councillor Judith Pritchard, and that's the last one.
Yes, we haven't gone on to the environmental part of it yet, the environmental and economy. And I wanted to ask about exactly what's happening to the amount of waste we've got and where it's going, because it does say that contractor costs have increased due to higher tonnages for residual waste. Well, we're supposed to be trying to cut down on residual waste. And then also it says for the civic amenity sites, well, actually, that's household recycling sites now, I think. There's an underspend due to reduced staff costs. So that sounds as if less people are taking their, stuff, residual waste to the tip. So I'm a bit confused as to what exactly is happening in the shift, which we had hoped went from residual to recycling and then food recycling, because it looks rather as if maybe that hasn't happened to a great extent. I don't know whether there's anyone here who could tell us, but I'm a bit concerned about that.
Mark S. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Pritchard. So obviously you are a member of the cross-party working group on waste. There's done some good work over the last 12 months. We have introduced various things, and we have seen more food waste be collected as separate food waste, which is much cheaper for us to get rid of, and obviously much more sustainable and carbon efficient. That being said, there is still a significant amount of food waste in the residual waste stream, which is on the forward work programme earlier. You agreed to receive a report on extending enforcement powers, which will come before you in the coming months. Residual waste has dropped at household waste recycling centres or household recycling centres because we've introduced pre-sort requirements, so require people to bring it sorted into recyclable streams. If it's not, then they have to sort it before it's deposited in the various containers. We've still got some way to go in terms of cracking the amount of residual waste in our collection service, and making sure that, you know, I think there's still something like 50% or 53% of waste that's in the residual stream that could be recycled or composted for food waste. So hence the extra enforcement powers coming before you. And obviously you've been part of the debate around reducing the frequency of residual waste collection to either 3 weekly or 4 weekly. And, you know, that's a policy direction that we're now going in since full council agreed our waste strategy. But still work to be done. We are progressing, but there's still quite a lot to be done. In terms of where our residual waste goes, it goes to our collected residual waste, goes to the energy from waste plant in Cardiff, operated by Viridor. And obviously that is not a cheap plant to operate.
Yeah, can I come back on that? It's the recycling waste that goes to the tips. So am I right in, have you just said that there's less recycled waste going to the tips than there were before?
No, I
instead
said
of
there's
the-
no. I said there's less residual waste.
Less residual waste.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So the fact that we're making people sort their recycling down out when they go to the household recycling centres, that has been a success, is it?
Yes, and that's what's contributed to the underspend in the HRC's service.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, I wasn't at the last meeting of the waste strategy because it clashed with something else. Thanks.
That's okay. Thank you, Councillor Pritchard. I can't see any more hands, so I'd like to thank officers and committee services, members of staff for being here, and I declare the meeting closed. Marina, if you've got a quick one,
did have
and
the
it has to be quick.
I had the question in the pre-meeting. I thought you'd call me. I just wondered what the overspend on the organic recycling was. Is that to do with
something? Is that something we can take outside?
We'll have to come back to you on that.
Yeah. All right, then just
Dawson.
email me the response. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Dawson. I missed you off my little list. So there we are. So I can therefore declare the meeting over. Thank you, committee services staff. Thank you, officer, for your attendance. I know for particularly some of the housing officers, it's been a very long day. So thank you very much.
What's that?
Thanks all. Thank you.